I mean, think about it. The next trillion-dollar tech giant isn't going to be born in, a Silicon Valley garage.
Right, definitely not.
It's going to be born in a freezing, high-altitude river in the Himalayas.
Which is just a wild visual.
It really is. And today, we are tearing into this mind-bending, highly detailed 10-year business roadmap that proposes exactly that.
Yeah, it's quite the document.
We are looking at a master plan for a venture called Himalayan Compute, and we are going to trace its proposed trajectory from a single mountain river across global deserts into the oceans, and ultimately, I mean, this is the crazy part, all the way to outer space.
Yeah, literally into orbit. So the source material mapping out this whole trajectory was published on April 28, 2026.
Okay.
It's by an author named Paramendra Kumar Bhagat on his Democracy for Nepal blog. He titles it Himalayan Compute 10-Year Roadmap, the Grand Solara Vision to Trillion-Dollar Valuation.
It's a very subtle title.
Oh, very understated, right. But it is this massive step-by-step blueprint for building a planetary-scale artificial intelligence infrastructure company.
Right.
And it treats Nepal not just as a location, but as like ground zero for a total global paradigm shift.
And what immediately hooked me about this document is the tone. I mean, it does not read like a cautious corporate white paper.
No, not at all.
It reads like a manifesto. I mean, the author actually throws down a public gauntlet right at the start.
Yeah, the call out, that was wild.
He specifically calls out an entrepreneur named Pukar Hamal. He's the founder of Security Pal AI. And the author issues this public challenge, telling Hamal he needs to join this new Himalayan Compute venture, unless, Hamal's current company can hit a $1 trillion valuation in 10 years.
Which is just an incredible thing to put in writing.
It is. It's this incredibly spicy mix of like profound macroeconomic theory and highly targeted, very public startup rivalry.
Which tells you right away we're dealing with a deeply aggressive Silicon Valley-style ambition.
Oh, absolutely.
But one that is hyper-focused on the natural physical resources of South Asia. We're looking at a plan that seeks to completely rewrite the global supply chain for AI.
Okay, let's unpack this. Starting with the core thesis. Why the Himalayas?
Right, the geographic question.
Yeah. Before we get into the whole 10-year timeline, we have to understand this Grand Solara vision. Like, why abandon the traditional tech hubs for the mountains of Nepal?
Well, to grasp the why, we have to fundamentally change how we think about data centers. Like, the standard model right now treats a data center basically as commercial real estate.
Just a big warehouse.
Exactly. You build a massive warehouse, you secure a grid connection, and you rent out space and cooling to tech companies.
Right.
The author argues that model is completely dead.
Yeah.
He treats Himalayan Compute as a moonshot infrastructure platform. He actually uses SpaceX as the direct analogy here.
I found that comparison really fascinating.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense when you break it down.
Because the argument is that SpaceX didn't just build, a slightly cheaper rocket. They redefined the fundamental economics of accessing orbit.
Right, they moved it from a slow, expensive, government-dominated monopoly into this rapid, reusable platform.
And the author is claiming Himalayan Compute will do the exact same thing for access to AI computing power.
But to pull off a disruption on that scale, you need an impenetrable economic moat. You need an undeniable physical advantage that your competitors just simply cannot replicate.
A natural advantage.
Exactly. And for Himalayan Compute, that moat is constructed from two things. It's climate and incredibly cheap renewable energy.
The hydropower.
Right. The text points out that Nepal offers hydropower at astonishingly low rates. We're talking between 3.5 to 4.5 cents per kilowatt hour.
Wow. Let's anchor that number for you listening. 4 cents a kilowatt hour. If you're building a massive server farm in Northern Virginia or California.
Which is where most of them are right now.
Right, which is where the vast majority sit. You are dealing with an incredibly strained electrical grid. You might be paying 10, 15, or even 20 cents per kilowatt hour.
And that price is highly volatile, too.
Exactly. And power is the absolute lifeblood of artificial intelligence. I mean, we are moving into an era where training a single frontier AI model takes gigawatts of power over several months.
It's staggering. And it's not just the power to run the chips either. It's the power to keep them from literally melting.
Yes, the heat issue.
That brings us to the climate factor. Traditional data centers use almost as much electricity running their massive industrial air conditioners as they do running the actual computers.
Which is wild to think about.
Right.
But in the Himalayas, the ambient temperature basically does the work for you. You are dealing with natural, high-altitude glacial air.
You essentially just open the window.
Yeah, free air conditioning.
Right. And the industry uses this metric called PUE. It stands for Power Usage Effectiveness. A perfect score is 1.0,
Meaning what exactly?
meaning every single watt of electricity drawn from the grid goes directly into the computer processors with zero waste. No power used for lights, cooling, nothing. Just pure compute.
Got it. Which is impossible in reality.
Exactly. But the roadmap projects that by leveraging the cold mountain air and the freezing river water, they can hit a PUE of 1.2 to 1.3.
Wow. Meaning only 20 to 30% extra power is needed for the cooling systems and the building operations.
Yeah, which is an incredibly lean operation.
So the physical advantages are super clear. You have some of the cheapest electricity on the planet and a climate that drastically slashes your cooling bill.
Right. But the author doesn't stop at physical geography, which is interesting.
No, he layers on this deeply complex geopolitical strategy. The text explicitly outlines a vision for Nepal to become a, quote, compute Switzerland.
And we're seeing a massive balkanization of technology right now.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, the United States, China, India, the European Union, they are all intensely paranoid about where their data is stored, where their AI models are trained.
And who ultimately controls the physical silicon.
Exactly. So the author's premise is that Nepal can position itself as a trusted, non-aligned zone in the middle of this escalating tech Cold War.
A safe haven.
Right. A jurisdiction where anyone can safely build and train their models without fear of interference.
I really struggle with this compute Switzerland concept, honestly. It's an elegant theory, but can true neutrality survive the reality of an AI arms race?
It's a huge question mark.
The text openly talks about building sovereign AI clusters and securing national infrastructure deals. I mean, you are talking about holding the most sensitive, economically vital data for competing superpowers.
Yeah, it's not just like hosting websites.
No. I look back at the Cold War and the space race. Could a small, neutral nation have successfully sold rocket fuel and telemetry data to both the US and the Soviets without one of those superpowers eventually forcing them to pick a side?
Probably not. And you're touching on what I think is the single most fragile assumption in the author's geopolitical framework. Yeah. Historically, neutrality functions best when the asset in question is something both sides mutually agree should be insulated from conflict, like international banking or diplomacy.
Right.
But compute power is no longer viewed as just a commercial service. It is rapidly being classified as a critical national security asset. It's on par with uranium enrichment or semiconductor manufacturing.
Right. So if the U.S. government decides that a specific cluster of GPUs in Nepal is being used by an adversarial nation to train military AI,
the pressure on Nepal to shut it down would be catastrophic.
absolutely.
But the author's counterbet is that the global desperation for cheap green energy will simply override that geopolitical paranoia.
Because everyone needs the juice.
Exactly. The text dives heavily into the macroeconomic tailwinds driving this.
Yeah.
Global power demand for data centers is not just growing, it is completely exploding.
Yeah, the roadmap cites projections requiring hundreds of gigawatts of new capacity by 2035.
Which is a number that's hard to wrap your head around.
Let's contextualize it. A gigawatt is a massive unit of energy. That is roughly the total output of a large-scale nuclear power plant.
A single plant, yeah.
The idea that the world needs hundreds of nuclear plants worth of energy just to feed server farms, it's staggering.
So the logic of the roadmap is just ruthless. If the world is that desperate for power, and you hold the keys to a massive reserve of cheap, carbon-free energy,
The clients will come to you.
they will come to you, regardless of the geopolitical friction. And if you can capture even a fraction of that multi-trillion-dollar demand, the text argues you justify, quote, NVIDIA-like multiples,
Meaning what in financial terms?
meaning you are no longer valued by investors as a boring utility company. You're valued as the central nervous system of the global economy.
And they don't just want to rent out the building either. The text emphasizes a full stack platform.
Right, they want to own every piece of it.
They want to own the dams generating the power, own the specialized GPU clusters, provide the software layer for developers, and even manage the carbon credits.
It is a terrifyingly ambitious vertical integration strategy.
It really is. But I mean, ambition doesn't pour concrete, right?
Very true.
How does a massive planetary vision like this actually survive year one? That brings us to the first phase of the timeline, ignition.
Right. Year 0 to 1 is entirely about laying a highly structured corporate and physical foundation. The roadmap dictates that Himalayan Compute must incorporate as a U.S. Delaware entity.
But with a wholly owned operating subsidiary on the ground in Nepal.
Yes. And they require dual headquarters,
Yeah.
one in San Francisco and one in Kathmandu.
Which is a classic corporate structure for international startups. You keep the parent company in Delaware because venture capitalists understand U.S. corporate law.
Yeah, they feel safe investing there.
But your actual operations, your boots on the ground, are in Nepal.
And that San Francisco presence is strictly for tapping into the deepest pools of capital and talent in the world.
Because they need a lot of capital.
Oh, yeah. For this ignition phase, the text sets a fundraising target of $50 million to $150 million in seed or Series A funding.
Which is wild. Raising up to $150 million before you even have a product is incredibly aggressive.
It's unheard of for most companies.
But the author doesn't just want money from standard Silicon Valley venture funds. He specifically targets the Nepali diaspora.
This is such a brilliant strategic maneuver. The text notes there are roughly 200,000 Nepalese in the United States alone, and many of them have achieved massive success in the tech sector.
Right.
The roadmap proposes tapping into that wealth by offering carry-like equity to bundlers.
Okay, let's break that down for a second because those are very specific finance terms. A bundler is someone who basically goes out and pools together smaller investments from their network, right?
Exactly. So if I'm a successful engineer in Silicon Valley, I might get 10 of my friends to put in $50,000 each.
And then what about the carry part?
Well, carry is a term typically used in private equity or venture capital. It represents a share of the profits of an investment fund.
Oh, I see.
So by offering carry-like equity to these bundlers, Himalayan Compute is essentially turning their earliest supporters into highly incentivized co-founders.
Ah. If the company succeeds, those bundlers make life-changing money.
Exactly. It weaponizes the diaspora network, ensuring that the most successful Nepali expats are heavily motivated to help the company navigate both Silicon Valley boardrooms and Kathmandu bureaucracy.
That is extremely smart. And what does that initial $150 million actually buy?
Mostly land and contracts.
Right. The roadmap specifies securing land and locking in 15 to 25-year power purchase agreements. These are long-term contracts guaranteeing a fixed price for electricity from the local hydropower authorities.
Which is crucial for the unit economics.
And the physical goal of year one is to construct a pilot campus with an IT load of 20 to 50 megawatts.
And to hit those PUE metrics of 1.2 to 1.3 we discussed earlier, they will deploy their first 10 to 20 megawatts of GPU clusters. They plan on partnering heavily with hardware giants like NVIDIA and AMD.
And then they just expose those servers to that natural mountain cooling.
Basically, yeah.
So what's the revenue strategy for this pilot phase? Because it seems like a mix of the old and the new.
It is. They will offer standard colocation, where they just rent rack space to other companies.
Yeah.
But they will also rent out raw GPU hours.
Essentially acting as a cloud provider for AI researchers.
Exactly. And crucially, they are targeting sovereign AI pilots with the governments of Nepal and India. They want to hit a revenue run rate of $10 million to $50 million by the end of the year.
The financial model is super sound, but any large-scale infrastructure project in a developing economy faces immense bureaucratic friction.
Oh, it's a nightmare usually.
Yeah, permitting, land acquisition, environmental reviews, these can stall a project for a decade.
Easily.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. The author completely acknowledges that risk and proposes a radical solution. The roadmap demands the creation of a one-desk fast-track system operating directly under the Prime Minister's office.
They are essentially asking the sovereign government of Nepal to bypass its entire municipal and regional permitting apparatus.
Which is a huge ask.
It's massive. The argument is that Himalayan Compute must be treated as a project of supreme national importance.
Right.
If they have to go through the standard channels to get a permit to lay fiber optic cable across a regional road, the 10-year timeline is dead on arrival.
It is a stunning visual when you put all these pieces together for yourself. You have venture capital flowing out of Silicon Valley, bundled by Nepali tech expats, financing the construction of a cutting-edge, brutalist server farm at the roof of the world.
Just sitting up there in the snow.
And that facility is wired with massive, low-latency fiber optic cables running straight down the mountains into the massive digital market of India.
And if they manage to navigate the politics, build the 50-megawatt pilot, and actually hit those thermodynamic cooling metrics, they prove the core hypothesis.
The moat is real.
Exactly. The moat is real, and the company survives year one.
Hmm.
But surviving a pilot phase and becoming a trillion-dollar entity are two very different things.
Oh, entirely. Which brings us to the phase the roadmap calls the Himalayan ramp. This covers years 2 and 3.
The growth phase.
Yes. The stated objective here is to reach unicorn status, a valuation of over $1 billion. You've proven the concept, now you have to scale at an explosive rate.
And the leap in scale is super aggressive. The text mandates expanding from that 50-megawatt pilot to a massive 100 to 200 plus megawatt load.
In 2 years.
Right. To do this within a 24-month window, you cannot rely on traditional construction methods. You can't hire architects to design bespoke buildings. The roadmap specifically points to modular builds.
How does that actually work in practice? We are talking about mountains. You can't just drive massive, delicate server racks up narrow, winding elevation roads, right?
Well, you utilize highly standardized infrastructure blocks. Imagine massive shipping containers that have been pre-fitted with cooling loops, power distribution units, and server racks.
Built off-site.
Exactly. At a factory in a more accessible location. These units are transported up the mountain and essentially plugged into a central spine of power and networking.
Oh, so you are stacking them together like Lego bricks?
That's the perfect way to think about it. It dramatically reduces on-site construction time and limits the impact of severe weather delays.
Okay, so the physical build is modular and fast, but building a 200-megawatt facility doesn't make you a unicorn unless you have someone paying for that power.
Very true.
During this Himalayan ramp phase, the text outlines a shift in the customer strategy. They need to secure anchor contracts.
And this is a critical transition. In the pilot phase, you might take whatever customers you can get. In the ramp phase, the goal is to lock up 70% of the total capacity in multi-year contracts with massive clients.
Like who?
We're talking about the hyperscalers, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, as well as dedicated AI research labs, large Indian tech enterprises, and sovereign wealth funds from the Gulf states.
Wow. And the text specifies keeping the remaining 30% for on-demand use. Why not lock in 100% of your capacity if you can get it?
It's a delicate balancing act of risk and reward. The 70% locked into long-term anchor contracts provides a floor. It guarantees predictable, recurring revenue.
And banks love that.
Oh, they require it. That is the exact metric that commercial banks and institutional investors demand to see before they will lend you hundreds of millions of dollars.
So the 30% kept for on-demand use is what? Pure upside.
Exactly. When a new generation of AI models drops and the market is suddenly starving for compute power, spot prices for GPU access skyrocket. That 30% allows Himalayan Compute to capture those massive price spikes.
That makes total sense. So the financials in this phase start to look like a really mature company. They plan to raise Series B and C rounds, bringing in another $500 million to over $1 billion in total equity.
Right.
But because they have those anchor contracts, they also introduce project finance and debt. They can borrow massive sums of money against their guaranteed future revenue, rather than having to constantly dilute the founders by selling more equity.
And the roadmap project's hitting an annual recurring revenue, or ARR, of $150 million to $300 million during this phase.
In just year 3.
Yeah. And more importantly, because the modular builds are highly efficient and the cooling costs remain practically zero, the gross margins are projected to soar into the 50 to 60% range.
And those are the exact metrics that Wall Street and venture capitalists use to assign a valuation. High recurring revenue plus massive profit margins pushes the company to a $2 billion to $8 billion valuation.
Boom, unicorn.
But there is a glaring hole in this plan, and I was actually thrilled to see the author address it. Because you can have all the modular containers and cheap power in the world, but you still need incredibly skilled human beings to maintain, network, and secure 200 megawatts of bleeding-edge AI hardware.
Right, you can't just, import 1,000 engineers from San Francisco to live in the Himalayas.
Exactly.
So the author introduces a vital piece of social infrastructure here, the Nepal AI Infrastructure Academy.
Okay, what is that?
It is a long-term play to cultivate local talent. They plan to build a pipeline capable of training hundreds of Nepali engineers in highly specific fields: thermal management, high-voltage electrical engineering, and AI networking.
It's a brilliant move for two reasons, really. First, local talent is vastly more cost-effective and sustainable than relying on expats.
Definitely.
And second, it deeply embeds the company into the local economy. If you are employing hundreds of highly paid, highly skilled locals, the government is much more likely to keep that one-desk fast-track permitting system open.
Yeah, the author understands that infrastructure is never purely technological. It is always deeply political and social.
It has to be.
However, even with the academy and the modular builds, the velocity demanded by this roadmap is terrifying. To hit a multi-billion-dollar valuation by year 3 requires an execution standard that basically borders on the miraculous.
It really does. I mean, supply chains for advanced GPUs are notoriously brittle. Logistics in mountainous regions are inherently hostile.
One storm could ruin everything.
Yeah, exactly. A single landslide could take out the road required to deliver those modular server units. How does the company actually survive this ramp-up phase without collapsing under its own ambition?
Well, what's fascinating here is how the roadmap attempts to counter this execution risk. They enforce a really draconian internal culture. The author demands an environment operating strictly on a merit-only basis.
Meaning no local politics?
Absolutely free of local politics, nepotism, or bureaucratic hesitation. He literally describes the company operating on a war footing.
Wow, war footing.
Yeah. But beyond internal culture, the text makes a crucial strategic concession. They know they cannot do this alone. The roadmap explicitly calls for establishing early, deep partnerships with massive Indian tech conglomerates.
Oh, so they're leveraging the logistical muscle of established giants. A massive Indian conglomerate already knows how to move thousands of tons of steel across Asia, how to navigate border customs, and how to secure industrial-scale supply chains.
Exactly. They are trading a piece of the pie for speed and logistical certainty.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, if they can maintain that war footing and leverage those partnerships, they reach the end of year 3 as a dominant regional player.
But a multi-billion-dollar regional player is still just a rounding error compared to a trillion-dollar valuation.
Right, it's not enough.
And this is where we hit a physical wall in the plan. Nepal's rivers, as massive and powerful as they are, have a capacity cap. You cannot simply draw infinite gigawatts from them without devastating the local ecology and completely draining the grid.
You've eventually just run out of water.
So how do they keep growing? This triggers the massive pivot in the roadmap. We move into years 4 through 7, a phase titled the Indo-Himalayan Bridge and the Solara terrestrial expansion.
And here the scale shifts from ambitious to globally systemic. In years 4 and 5, the company looks across the border. They expand into the Indian Himalayas, tapping into the shared river basins to unlock an additional 300 to 500 megawatts of hydro capacity.
Which pushes their total IT load toward the 1 gigawatt thresholds.
Yeah.
1 gigawatt of dedicated AI compute. To put that in perspective for you, a facility of that size would be drawing enough power to run a medium-sized city. And all of that energy is concentrated into server racks.
It's an insane amount of density.
You can't just blow cold mountain air over that kind of density anymore, can you?
No, the thermodynamics completely break down at that scale. The air simply cannot carry the heat away fast enough. This is why the roadmap specifies the introduction of advanced immersion cooling.
Okay, shed some light on the physics of this for us. Because when people hear immersion, they think of water. And water destroys electronics.
Right. They're definitely not using water. The servers are basically submerged in specialized, non-conductive dielectric fluids.
Okay, so like a highly engineered mineral oil.
Exactly. Or a synthetic fluorocarbon.
Yep.
These fluids are vastly more efficient at absorbing heat than air. In a two-phase immersion system, the heat from the microchips actually causes the fluid to boil and vaporize.
Wait, really? It boils?
It boils. And as it turns into gas, it carries a massive amount of heat away from the processor. The gas rises, hits a condenser coil at the top of the tank, turns back into liquid, and then just rains back down onto the servers.
Wow. It is a closed-loop system of continuous boiling and condensing, allowing them to pack the chips incredibly close together.
Yes, the density is incredible. And beyond the cooling tech, the company begins to engage heavily in energy arbitrage.
Arbitrage is essentially exploiting price differences in a market, right?
Exactly. Because Himalayan Compute controls massive amounts of generation and storage at this point, they can play the energy markets hour by hour.
How does that work?
So if the broader electrical grid experiences a massive spike in demand, say, during a heat wave when everyone turns on their air conditioning, the price of electricity skyrockets, Himalayan Compute can briefly pause their lower-priority AI training tasks and actually sell their hydropower back to the grid at an enormous premium.
Oh, that's wild. They're acting as a shock absorber for the national grid and getting paid to balance the system.
It's exactly. With 1 gigawatt of capacity, advanced cooling, and energy arbitrage, the roadmap projects annual recurring revenue crossing the $1 billion mark.
With valuations targeting $10 billion to $30 billion, they cross from unicorn to decacorn.
But the hydro capacity is now functionally capped out. They have reached the absolute limits of the Himalayan river systems.
Which forces the most dramatic terrestrial pivot in the entire document. In years 6 and 7, the roadmap abandons the freezing mountains and marches directly into the blistering heat of the world's deserts. The author calls this the solar empire.
And the locations specified are massive in scale. First, Rajasthan in India, tapping into the sprawling solar parks that already exist there.
Makes sense geographically.
Second, the Gulf countries, which offer a potent combination of intense solar radiation, deep capital reserves, low taxes, and crucial proximity to undersea fiber optic cables.
Oh, the submarine cables.
Right. And third, the Sahara Desert in North Africa, specifically positioned to capture the massive AI compute demand coming out of Europe via Mediterranean submarine cables.
Okay, but the shift from hydro to solar introduces a catastrophic engineering problem. I mean, the entire premise of the Himalayan phase was built on baseload power.
Right. A river flows 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
And AI training models require constant, uninterrupted power for weeks or months at a time. If the power cuts out, the training run fails, and you lose millions of dollars of compute time.
You basically have to start over.
But the sun goes down. A solar empire implies a massive drop in power generation for 12 hours a day. How do you run uninterrupted, gigawatt-scale AI training on an intermittent power source?
Well, the roadmap dictates a specific, massively expensive architectural solution. Hybrid hydro-solar plus battery and long-duration storage. They embrace a concept known in the energy sector as overbuild.
Okay, let's walk through the economics of overbuild, because it sounds kind of counterintuitive to build more than you need.
In traditional infrastructure, yeah, overbuilding is considered wasteful. But in renewable energy, it is the holy grail of stability. If your data center requires 1 gigawatt of power to operate, you don't build a 1 gigawatt solar farm. You build a 3 or 4 gigawatt solar farm.
Right.
During peak daylight hours, you use 1 gigawatt to run the servers, and you use the remaining excess gigawatts to charge massive grid-scale energy storage systems.
Oh, I see. We're talking about oceans of lithium-ion batteries. Or perhaps even newer technologies like flow batteries or pumped hydro storage where the geography actually allows for it.
Exactly. The batteries act as a massive buffer. When the sun sets, the facility seamlessly transitions to drawing power from the storage systems, guaranteeing the 247 firm power that the hyperscalers and AI labs demand.
The scale the author envisions for the solar phase is breathtaking. The text points to a target of 5+ gigawatts of capacity.
And at 5 gigawatts, the financial profile of the company mutates entirely. You are generating multi-billion-dollar revenues with margins remaining exceptionally high. You can no longer fund this through venture capital.
No way. A $50 million seed round is totally irrelevant when a single solar plus storage data center campus costs several billion dollars to construct.
So the funding mechanism shifts to Wall Street. The roadmap outlines initial public offerings, direct listings on global public exchanges, and securing massive tranches of utility-scale infrastructure debt.
And the valuation targets skyrocket to between $50 billion and $150 billion.
When you step back and look at what the company has become by year 7, it is barely recognizable from the startup in year 1.
It really isn't. It is no longer just a tech company offering server space.
No, they have essentially become an independent, global utility conglomerate.
So what does this all mean for the industry?
It means they own the solar arrays, they own the battery parks, they own the cooling infrastructure, and they own the specialized chips.
They are processing artificial intelligence, but structurally, they look like a sovereign energy provider spanning the mountains of Asia, the deserts of the Middle East, and the plains of Africa.
But even a terrestrial empire of that magnitude faces insurmountable physical constraints. Land requires zoning. It requires dealing with municipal governments, navigating complex property rights, and engaging in terrestrial geopolitics.
Right. To maintain the relentless exponential growth curve required to hit $1 trillion, the author looks at the map and realizes there are really only two untapped frontiers left where you don't have to negotiate with a local mayor to build a power plant.
The oceans and outer space.
Yeah, this is where the 10-year roadmap stops looking like a standard business plan and starts looking like near-future science fiction. We enter years 8 through 10.
In years 8 and 9, the text outlines the deployment of what it calls the blue compute layer. The plan is to construct massive, wave-powered, floating or offshore data centers, specifically targeting deployments in the South China Sea.
The strategic logic here is driven by latency, right? Because latency is the time it takes for a data packet to travel from a server to a user's device and back. In the world of high-frequency financial trading or real-time AI applications, a delay of just a few milliseconds can cost millions of dollars.
And the Asia-Pacific tech boom, centered around hubs like Singapore, Shenzhen, and Tokyo, it demands localized compute power.
Right. If your AI servers are in the Sahara or the Himalayas, the physical distance the light has to travel through the fiber optic cables introduces unavoidable latency.
It's just the speed of light.
Exactly. By deploying floating data centers right offshore in the South China Sea, you drastically shorten that distance.
And from an engineering standpoint, the ocean offers two distinct advantages. First, you have a limitless supply of kinetic energy. The constant motion of the waves can be captured by wave energy converters.
Oh, that's clever.
And second, you are floating in an infinite heat sink. You have billions of gallons of cold seawater to absorb the thermal output of the servers.
The physics are highly favorable, sure, but the engineering nightmare of the blue compute layer cannot be overstated. I mean, salt water is one of the most corrosive substances on the planet.
Oh, it destroys everything.
Right. Attempting to maintain delicate, hyper-advanced silicon chips in a humid, highly saline, constantly oscillating environment requires material science breakthroughs. You are essentially building a submarine that processes AI.
Not to mention the geopolitical insanity of parking massive sovereign data centers in the South China Sea, which is arguably the most fiercely contested maritime territory on Earth.
Yeah, good luck with that. But if they solve the corrosion and navigate the naval patrols, the roadmap projects total capacity hitting 10+ gigawatts. The valuation pushes into the $200 billion to $500 billion range.
Which sets the stage for the absolute climax of the master plan, year 10. The author labels this the Solara orbital vision.
This is the ultimate goal. The stated objective is planetary scale, energy unconstrained compute.
It's a huge phrase.
The author argues that no matter how many rivers we dam or deserts we cover in glass, the exponential energy demands of true artificial general intelligence will eventually outstrip what the Earth's surface can provide.
So the proposed solution is to sever the tether to Earth entirely. The roadmap outlines launching satellite compute nodes into low Earth orbit, or LEO.
They literally want to put GPU clusters in space. The entire premise rests on a massive assumption regarding launch economics, though.
It really does.
The text explicitly mentions Starship-class economics, assuming that next-generation, fully reusable heavy-lift rockets will drive the cost of putting a kilogram of payload into orbit down to below $100 or $200.
Which is a fraction of what it used to be.
Yeah.
But if you can overcome the launch costs, the orbital environment offers the ultimate realization of the Solara vision.
Because of the solar axis.
Right. In specific orbits, a satellite experiences zero atmospheric interference, no cloud cover, and essentially no nighttime. It has access to raw, unfiltered, 247 solar energy.
And how do they talk to Earth?
The satellites would communicate with Earth ground stations and with each other using advanced laser inter-satellite links, creating this massive orbiting mesh network.
Okay, but the physics of running a data center in a vacuum are violently opposed to computing. I really have to push back hard on this. Shedding heat in vacuum is like trying to cool down a boiling cup of coffee by wrapping it in a vacuum-sealed thermos.
It's the central paradox of space-based computing.
Right. Without air or water to carry the thermal energy away via convection or conduction, the heat has nowhere to go.
You can only reject heat in a vacuum through thermal radiation, emitting infrared energy into the coldest space.
And thermal radiation is incredibly inefficient compared to pumping cold river water over a heat sink.
It is, which means the physical design of these orbital nodes would look nothing like a terrestrial server rack. They would likely require massive deployable radiator fins, perhaps utilizing advanced microchannel cooling plates that circulate an internal fluid out to the fins to radiate the heat away.
It is an immense engineering challenge.
Furthermore, the silicon itself must be radically altered.
Oh, because the radiation environment in orbit is lethal to electronics?
Exactly. Cosmic rays and solar radiation will literally flip the microscopic ones and zeros inside traditional memory chips. It causes what are known as single-event upsets. A stray subatomic particle can literally crash an entire AI training run.
Wow.
So the chips must be physically radiation-hardened, built with redundant logic gates, which makes them heavier, slower, and exponentially more expensive.
Given all of that, the thermos effect, the cosmic rays, the sheer cost of rocketry, how does the author justify this as a viable business strategy and not just, a sci-fi thought experiment?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the author's thesis is that economics will inevitably force the technology to adapt. The architecture proposed in the text is a hybrid ground space system.
Okay, so not everything goes to space.
Right? They do not intend to run massive weeks-long AI training models in orbit. The training that requires dense, interconnected clusters of chips remains on Earth, powered by the hydro, solar, and wave abilities.
So what exactly are the satellites doing then?
They are dedicated to AI inference.
Inference, okay.
Yeah, inference is the phase where an already trained model actually responds to a user's prompt, processes a query, or runs an algorithm.
Ah.
Inference requires significantly less hardware density and consumes less power in sudden bursts. Crucially, inference benefits massively from being globally accessible.
I see.
An orbital node can beam the results of an algorithm down to a drone over the Pacific Ocean just as easily as to a financial firm in London.
So by segregating the heavy training to Earth and moving the lighter inference workloads to orbit, the author attempts to balance the harsh thermodynamics of space with the need for global reach.
Exactly. And the metrics for this final stage are the ones that actually break the trillion-dollar barrier. Tens of gigawatts of effective capacity spread across the global fabric. Over $50 billion in annual recurring revenue. This is the end game. A truly planetary infrastructure.
It is a staggering, almost intimidating vision. But before we wrap this up, we have to look at the engine driving this expansion. The author spends a significant portion of the roadmap detailing the culture and the national impact required to execute this 10-year sprint.
This is where we encounter a really profound philosophical paradox within the text. On an operational level, the culture demanded is utterly ruthless.
Like Silicon Valley ruthless.
Yes, the author mandates a strict Silicon Valley ethos. Merit only, zero tolerance for politics or nepotism, and operating on a constant war footing. It is unapologetically hyper-capitalist.
Yet, alongside that ruthless corporate machinery, the text leans heavily into a deeply patriotic narrative. The author frames this entire endeavor as Nepal's Skype moment.
The analogy to Estonia is highly intentional there.
Yeah, back in the early 2000s, Estonia was a small, post-Soviet nation struggling to find its place in the modern economy. By becoming the birthplace of Skype, they completely transformed their global standing.
They attracted massive foreign investment and essentially branded themselves as the digital republic of Europe.
The author promises that Himalayan Compute will be the catalyst for a similar transformation in Nepal. He envisions massive foreign direct investment, unparalleled job creation, and a reversal of the historical brain drain, bringing the brightest Nepali minds back home from Silicon Valley and Europe.
It is a fascinating tension. I mean, the roadmap heavily utilizes the deep networks of the Nepali diaspora. It explicitly promises to deliver economic multipliers that will elevate the national economies of South Asia.
Right.
Yet the author stubbornly insists that the company must remain fiercely independent. A privately led, globally ambitious entity free from the entanglements of local governance.
It's basically unyielding capitalism weaponized in the service of profound national pride. And that circles us back to the sheer, unwavering confidence of the author, Paramendra Kumar Bhagat. He concludes the text with a really stark declaration. The vehicle is ready, the destination is clear.
He isn't asking for permission.
No, he is calling his shot in public.
A document like this forces a reaction from you as the reader. You cannot encounter a roadmap that casually plots a path from a glacial river to a multi-billion-dollar solar empire and finally to a trillion-dollar orbital satellite network without fundamentally recalibrating your understanding of the sheer scale of the AI revolution.
Just to briefly recap this staggering physical journey, we tracked a 10-year sprint, It begins by harnessing the kinetic energy of a freezing river in Nepal to cool a handful of servers.
And then scales across the Himalayas.
Leaps into the blistering deserts of India and the Sahara to construct gigawatt-scale solar arrays. It moves offshore, capturing the power of the South China Sea, and culminates in a fleet of radiation-hardened satellites beaming processed intelligence down from the stars.
For anyone trying to grasp the future of technology, this roadmap serves as a brutal wake-up call. The narrative that software is ethereal, that it exists in an invisible cloud, is a complete lie.
It is.
The future of artificial intelligence is an incredibly heavy, physical, industrial race for raw megawatts, for thermal cooling capacity, and for geographic real estate.
Yeah.
The digital world is anchored by concrete, steel, and copper.
It leaves us with a final, slightly unsettling thought to mull over for you listening.
This raises an important question.
Exactly. The entire thesis of this roadmap assumes that humanity can simply keep expanding our energy capture indefinitely. We move from the rivers to the deserts to the oceans and finally out into orbit, all to feed the insatiable exponential appetite of artificial intelligence. But at what point does the physical infrastructure required to run the machines eclipse the infrastructure we use to sustain human life? We're not just building software anymore, we are actively terraforming our planet and eventually our orbit to build a completely new silicon-based planetary ecosystem.